Serious, prison workers of Reddit. Have you ever met an ex-inmate of yours out of prison? If so, what happened? I taught Ged Prep in a prison for about 6 years, and I saw a lot of inmates on the out. When I started, I lived next door to the halfway house, and used to see guys all the time, find out how they were doing and so on. I'm Facebook friends with a few guys. One in particular worked as my TA in class. I'd let him run a class every now and then and he was an excellent teacher. He's been out for several years and runs an alternative education program in his old neighborhood, helping dudes get their GED. We chat every now and then. He's doing great and really making a difference in the community. That's awesome. I taught yoga to inmates for a few years. One guy was being released and on the morning of the first thing he did was renew his wedding vows with his wife at a nearby park. He invited me and a few of the other yoga teachers. All the inmates I taught to were very friendly, especially given it was a high security prison. It is rare for an inmate to have a wife and family waiting for them after a 30-year imprisonment. CEO in South Texas. Was shopping with my wife and ran into a huge 6 feet 7 inches HPL member that me and a co-worker had to take down due to his aggressiveness. All he did was shake my hand and asked how I was doing. Was honestly expecting crap to go down. Nice guy when he's not surrounded by his people that like to be butt hats. Nothing too dramatic here. I was a nurse practitioner for our county jail for a couple years. A few months ago I was drinking at a dive bar in the rougher side of town with friends, and a man came up to me and said I had been his provider there, and thanked me for taking care of him. Nice. I ran into a guy that as an LVN I would do a pill pass to. He said hello, and thanks for not shorting him on his methadone. Yeah, part of my job involves teaching inmates, in minutes, mod, to care for 6 retired racehorses and the farm itself. It's a pretty great program. We also have dog training, vegetable gardening, and even beekeeping programs across the state, and the men usually end up getting jobs working with horses after their release. They get a Groom 1 certificate. 2 people come to mind. One guy got a job working for a well-known trainer in the area. The trainer has given jobs to a lot of people and is very well respected. Great guy. He let our graduate live in a trailer on his property, rent-free, set him up with an old TV and PlayStation, had him eat dinner with the family, etc. The guy was a good guy but had a lot of family problems he just couldn't get away from. One night his sister called and said she was in trouble, and he panicked and took the trainer's truck without asking to help her. Not anything nefarious, but a breach of trust and he got fired. We saw him again helping him move his belongings out and try to find a job on the track. A lot of the guys we work with aren't necessarily terrible people, but have incredibly poor impulse control and it gets them into trouble. Another guy is a better story. We had an open house at the barn for the public and one of our graduates came back for it. He was working in a factory at that point and had a steady place to live, had stayed clean, and so on. The horses loved him and clearly remembered him, as much as horses can. He was very open about his history with our visitors and most respected him. One thing that was depressing was that he had real trouble trying to get jobs with horses at some places, like vet clinics, rescues, where he would have had to administer drugs to their horses, because he had a drug conviction. This guy was like a goddamn horse magician and would have been great at those jobs. I understand the caution, but it just sucks seeing the trouble people have after release getting housing, jobs, and fair treatment. We can teach them job skills and educate them and get them started, but a lot of the time they just run into brick walls on the outside. I was a correctional officer from 2003 to 2010. In early 2005 I switched from cable to DirecTV, and one of the 2 installers that came to my house was a former inmate. He didn't recognize me at first, but I could tell he had placed me by the end of the visit. Nothing bad came of it, he was an okay guy, but we had a policy that said we had to report encounters like that, just in case of any future issues. After I reported it, that was the end of it, though I think he came back to my jail later on an unrelated charge. Former guard in TX here, was filling my car with gas when I heard my last name being called. We wore name tags with our last name on them so inmates could call us officer so and so. Ended up being a dude who was locked up free on parole. He walked towards me and we chit-chatted for a bit, shook hands and all, wished him well and he did the same for me. He said he always had respect for me because I was the same officer day in and day out every time I worked. They knew what they got with me, and I also showed respect to all the inmates no matter what it was they did. We really had no way of knowing what they did to land in there, but some would share freely if you asked them. I honestly did not remember the guy because you deal with thousands of inmates. The only ones I honestly remember were the staff support inmates that help you out and you delegate menial jobs to them, etc. Janitorial type crap. Anyways, pretty uneventful encounter. My old man retired from a prison. Best piece of advice he gave me when inquiring about that type of work was the inmates have already been judged, so don't judge them and you'll be gravy. I think what you said about giving respect earns respect is spot on. I was a correctional officer and sergeant for about 6 years. I left corrections and had been with the police for 14 years. I have encountered many inmates on the street while on and off duty. I never once had a problem. However, I was once bear hugged by an inmate who was happy to see me and tell me how well he was doing. I once had an inmate simply nod at me and acknowledge my presence and everything in between. I was young when I started, never had an issues to speak of inside, and gained a pretty high level of respect from the inmate population, system-wide. I was never assaulted, but I used quite a bit of force. It's prison. It happens. I once arrested a dude who had carjacked someone. I spotted the car and attempted to stop him. He stopped the car and fled on foot. Ordinarily, I drive as long as I could as he ran, but he stopped the stolen car in such a way that I couldn't maneuver my car around it. I simply jumped into the stolen car and drove that until I was able to get out on foot and run. Apparently, he recognized me and just surrendered. As I tackled him to the ground, he kept saying my last name, which was strange. Turns out, he was one of my inmate workers in the prison who would clean for me. When he saw it was me who was chasing him, he decided not to fight. Many lols were had. Forensic psychiatry psychologist here. I once went canoeing and there was a group of big bulky tattooed guys who looked to be right wing and most likely were starting a route next to my group of friends. One of them was an ex-patient who had murdered his drinking buddy and carefully cleaned the flat for hours after. He has been working in a janitor service for about 2 years now and is still sober as far as I know. I just discreetly said hello and he discreetly said hello and none of my friends noticed. Another ex-patient who had killed his wife sold me a fish sandwich a while ago. Not sure if he still does that. It happens now and then, but it isn't really exciting to be honest. I worked in a prison for 26 years and I met ex-inmates outside of prison a lot. Still do. Most of them stop and tell me how good they are doing and what line of work they are in now. Just a month ago, I was walking into the ice cream store and an ex-inmate driving by saw me and pulled over and got out of the car to talk to me a while. I always treated the inmates like adults and they knew what I expected of them. They knew that if they broke the rules and I found out, I would hold them accountable. They also knew that if they conducted themselves like adults I would not come around trying to find some gotcha rule violation. Never had to fight anyone in prison and all the guys I've run into on the outside have been smiling when they are talking to me. I think it worked out. Sounds like it's all about respect. I was a CO for a brief period of time and got my brother a job there just out of high school for an even shorter period of time. He hated working in the prison. A while later he tells me about this weird girl who added him on Facebook and is sending creepy messages. I looked her up and it turns out one of the former inmates was stalking him. I made him delete and block her immediately and warned him again about adding strangers. He'd been there so briefly he didn't recognize her name, though she'd been a problematic inmate who I remembered distinctly for harassing him when he'd started working there. I always kept an eye out because it's a lot easier in a women's facility for them to file suit against male officers and I didn't want his Navy getting him in trouble. Only once so far. I was doing hospital coverage and was sitting in the lobby of the hospital with another officer waiting a few minutes before we went up and relieved day shift. Someone got off the elevator and said, "Oh man, prison name brings guys down here. I can't believe I finally saw one of you guys on the outs." He continued walking with whoever he was with. I have no clue who he was. He may not have even recognized us if we hadn't been in uniform. New Yorker here. Saw an ex-inmate while getting coffee, yelled at him to take his do-rag off and he jumped and said, "AWW crap, you can't do that crap no more." I see former inmates quite frequently. I live in an area that has a smaller population. If I am out with my family and I see someone that I had dealt with in the jail and they want to speak to me, I show them respect and have a conversation with them. I don't call them out as to where I know them from. I simply tell my wife that they are one of my customers. As soon as I say that to my wife, she knows what that means because that is our code word for situations such as these. I had always shown anyone that I dealt with their common courtesy and respect. I never have been concerned about being out in public with my family and bumping into a former inmate. The only time I had an issue was when a male inmate, who was known to be a horrible person and general pain in the rear to most of the other COs, threatened to find my house and come see me. I pulled him off to the side and held a conversation with him and let him know that my number was listed in the phone book and he could come see me at any time. All I asked was that he gave me a phone call first to let me know he was coming over. He asked why I wanted a phone call first and I told him that I wanted to be sure I could give him a proper reception. He told me I was crazy and that he was only playing. I told him that I didn't play when it came to my family and that I took the issue very seriously. I also reminded him that I was one of the few that treated him like a human being, and that he had no reason to threaten me like that. He told me that some of the other inmates had put him up to it. I have yet to receive that phone call, and I never had any other issues with that inmate. I, of course, made sure that this exchange was well documented with the facility director and shift supervisor. Yes, I worked in a medium security prison as an instructor teaching the less fortunate incarcerated English and language arts. One day I was entering a business and saw two of my ex-students inmates in the same parking lot. We chatted, they were working and keeping clean. All was good. Tons of them. Literally, you treat people with respect, regardless of the situation, and you get respect in return. That does not mean you take crap from anyone. You give, you get. One of my most recent favorites was when I was riding the bus to work in plain clothes as a social experiment I was doing. It was a great time. I learned a lot about public transportation and people outside of jail in general. But life ain't easy if that's what you have to rely on to get around town. Anyway, it was about a half-mile walk from the closest bus stop to the jail. So I saw a lot of ex-inmates going and coming. Many of them recognized me and would stop and talk or walk with me. One day, a dude riding a bike passed me walking, turned around and said, "Hey boss lady." I stopped and said, "Yeah, man. How you doing?" He turned slow circles on his bike in the middle of traffic, talking. "I heard the House of Pain is down. Is that true?" The House of Pain is the dishwashing room and the kitchen in the jail. It's always steamy, hot and nasty, but even more so when the automatic dishwasher is down. Then, the trustees, county sentenced inmates, have to wash the trays by hand, which is double the pain. I said, watching him dodge cars, "Well, yeah, it's down but we have an estimate it'll be fixed by the end of the month." He replied, "Great, thanks. I'll try not to get arrested until then," and rode off. Crime prevention by way of kitchen equipment repair time. Who knew? I used to work as a federal CO. I met a guy that was a couple years ahead of me in HS that I was acquaintances with before my job, his incarceration, who was locked up at my FCI. While I worked there, I could have had him moved to a different prison if it was a problem, and if I did it would have took him far away from his family. He stayed out of my way and let me do my job without trying me, so I treated him like he was just any other inmate. I wasn't a dong about executing my duties with anyone. I always just did my job. Anyway, I bumped into him in a bar after I quit and he was released. We exchanged the "what's up" head nod and went about our business. That was the end of it. I'm a college student working in a variety of correctional facilities doing life skills prep and tutoring. One of the inmates I had been teaching eventually got out and I ran into him the next week afterwards at a probation program for juveniles where I also worked. The facility has a gym where the kids play basketball and a classroom where we teach. It's a very well-known location in the community I work in. He was found shooting up in the bathroom of the program's facility, and we immediately threw him out and called the police. Not as interesting a story as the ones in this thread, but a story nonetheless. Probably late to reply, but oh well. I've had two so far. The first was like many others here. An inmate recognized me at a gas station and shook my hand. I worked in the education department after 5 years working in general population where they train inmates in different trades. Welding is fairly popular and they can earn a bachelor's degree. This person in particular was a graduate and from what I gathered after our chat had gotten his life together and was doing well. The next was on Christmas actually. My parents came to visit but I was still at work. After getting off I picked up my wife and we all planned to eat dinner at Denny's. My wife and I arrived first. Found a table, and she went to the bathroom real quick. I was still in uniform, sitting alone at the table when I noticed this guy staring at me. I didn't recognize him, but I did recognize his tattoos. Most of them were Tango Blast. He gave me the stink eye the entire time and I just looked right back at him until my wife came back. He left shortly after. I'm not entirely certain why he would be angry with me, or it was probably just the uniform. I had a decent reputation in prison that was built with respect, other than the occasional knucklehead. I never really lost sleep over it however. I worked on the inmate telephone system for the Wisconsin dock for 8+ years. Towards the end I was at a Brewers game one day walking down the crowded concourse and hear someone loudly say, "Hey, there goes the telephone man." Story time. I worked at a work release facility and made friends with some of the only other reasonable human beings that worked there. Contract employment invites a lot of terrible people, which is something that really irked me about the job. Other guys there were just trying to get their lives back together and didn't need half the crap they got anyway. So 8 or 9 of us, including the director of the entire facility, decide to go out to a karaoke bar after work one night. After a couple hours of bad journey, evanescence, etc., we decide to leave. But first, a few people want to go outside for a smoke, so I stay inside with my girlfriend, now wife, to finish another drink. Out of nowhere, I hear, "Oh man, Phelan, is that you? It's great to see you," from behind me. I turn around, and there's one of my old work release guys with a drink in his hand and a big smile on his face. We shoot the crap for a while, and then in the middle of a sentence he's like, "By the way, don't tell anyone I'm here. My parole officer will kill me." I realize that he's still on parole, and since he had a past of substance abuse, a condition of that parole is a strict no drinking, no drugs policy. Right after he says this, I look out the window and there's the director of the work release facility looking back at me, surrounded by a number of other workers. The guy next to me looks at me, looks out the window, and then looks back at me and, after swirling his drink in his glass a few times, says, "Well crap, I'm gonna go ahead and go." All of us had to fill out paperwork because we're mandatory reporters. I followed up later and it turns out the guy didn't even get in trouble because he passed a polygraph saying he hadn't been drinking. They're fallible, folks, which was apparently enough to go on against our word somehow. I don't feel too bad about him not getting reamed for it, because he was a really nice guy and didn't seem like the kind to re-offend. But man, I will never forget the bug-eyed look on his face when he looked out that window. TLDR. Out with 8 other prison system employees, I ran into a guy still on parole, a condition of which is that he was not allowed to consume alcohol when he was drunk at a karaoke bar. Most of the former inmates I have run into have been positive interactions. Anyone who works in corrections will tell you that they will typically treat you on the outside with the same respect you give them on the inside, even if there have been instances where you may have had to go hands-on with them. Deep down they understand that you have a job to do despite what they might feel in the heat of the moment, and as long as you never take things to a level higher than necessary, they can almost see why you did it later on and even sometimes be appreciative, believe it or not. I've actually run into a few of them at the college I'm finishing my degree at currently, and I crap you not had some guys come up and tell me how I had an influence on them wanting to get their lives together. It is one heck of a feeling. I gotta say, one of my favorite lines that I tell them at work is that I am a corrections officer, not a punishment officer. If I can do anything within appropriate reason to keep you from spiraling down the drain with life once you are released, I will do it. Nobody in society has anything to gain from a person sitting behind bars pee their life away, myself included. For those curious, I am in Philadelphia, not the most friendly city, not the least violent. Truth be told, any one of us posting could be an inmate tonight. They're men and women, some much worse than others, but it's a job. I had 192 on my block and I knew every single one of them either by name or nickname. There were 4 blocks of 192, 3 blocks of 64 in the mental health services wing with 200 plus. And that was just in my facility. I used to have inmates tell me on my first day back after days of "thank God you're back. This place is off the hook when you're gone." I've had dudes admit to murder, cry that their women left them, introduce me to their family in the visiting room. I didn't take any crap, but I also didn't start any either. Buddy of mine works youth corrections here in MB, Can. I've actually run into a couple of his wards while out on the town together. One was a teen girl who just walked by. The other one we ran into outside the bar and he just reintroduced himself to my friend politely, shook hands and went back to his own business. This did not happen to me, but it did happen and it was a major cluster frick. One of the prison psychologists testified that a sex offender should be let out. He was, based on her recommendation. She was the darling of the administration but a total borderline wacko. Also married plus 2 kids. So then one of the officers is down the shore on his day off and sees her with his former inmate and they're making out. This was before the smartphone as we know it, but he was still able to get a video. Long story short, his conditional discharge was of course violated, but she lost her job and her license. What morons. If you're going to do something like that with a friggin' ex-inmate ex-patient, at least go to another state. Worked in a maximum security prison. Saw an ex-inmate hitchhiking near the on-ramp to the interstate. I knew this inmate was a good guy from my experience with him on the inside, so I pulled over and asked what was up. Turns out he had gone to visit a friend in the town we were both in currently, and that he lives and works in a town a solid hour away by car. On his way home, his vehicle broke down. He was panicked about how he'd get home and to work the next day. He said he had a good job doing roofing, and that he didn't want to lose it. I gave him a ride back home, so he wouldn't miss work. He lived in a town on the way to where I was going. On the way up we discussed quite a few things, including the prison. He also told me he had been clean and sober since he got out. He was a pretty bad addict and alcoholic. The reason he was in prison was not drugs but something he did while under the influence of hard drugs. He wasn't bullshitting me either. He had no reason to lie and I'm no fool. I was always taught that there are more of them than there are of us. In other words, inmates outnumber the guards. The second rule was if you respect them, they will respect you. This has always worked for me. The only inmates that I had problems with were the real pricks. And those guys, cold-blooded murderers, violent rapists, etc., won't be getting out anytime soon. If I had to deal with one of those on the outside, I'd suspect I'd be remembered as one of the good ones and we'd have a mutual respect, so to speak. If I had any problems, I'd manage them like I would anyone trying to give me trouble in a dark alley, with the 9mm that is always at my side. Retired corrections here. I see them all the time. The ones doing well come right up. I can tell by the old title I had at the time they were in. SGT, Lieutenant, Captain, etc. Approximately what years we were in contact. They ask me if I remember them, usually no, and tell me what they've been doing and how happy they are out in the world. But the ones not doing well are, quite obviously, going out of their way to avoid me. Many years ago, I had just sat down at a Kaikai's for lunch. No cracks please. I loved their rice. A guy appeared to be cleaning up the place in our section. After about the 4th time he cleaned a brass rail near me in the last 5 minutes, I went up to him and asked him what his problem was. He said I looked like a guy he used to know. When I asked his prison number, he said, "It is you, Inspector." I told him to find someplace else to clean. While I was waiting for our loot to arrive, I saw him stop our server and go back towards the kitchen. The server then brought our food to us, but looked funny. I asked him what that convict did to our food. He said nothing. I got up and got the manager and told him what I saw. When she questioned the server, he started crying and said if he told that guy, the ex-prisoner, would beat his butt. She told him he would not be fired and she would call the police if necessary. Our server told them he hocked a big old batch of snot and blew it in my meal and mixed it in with his finger. He was fired, then arrested because he was acting like a convict. His parole was violated and he went back to prison. Never saw him again. Dang, you're always on the lookout for funny business, Inspector. I work in a juvenile jail, and yes, I run into my former kids all the time in the mall, grocery store, etc. The thing I do is that I treat everyone with dignity and respect while I work with them in jail. That's just who I am. It is how I would want to be treated if the roles were reversed. Most of them know that I don't have them in jail. A judge does, and they give me respect in return. As a result, nothing much happens when I run into them in the free. They generally scream my name, race up to me, give me a hug, and tell me how they've been doing. I tell them I'm proud of them for turning their life around and we move on. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.